Says he's here.
Jenny, have you heard from Warren? I knew he was going to miss one or two. Good evening and welcome to the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also access the meeting via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comments on cases. If you will please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Beal, I'll turn the time over to you for our roll call.
Mr. Schneer?
Here.
Ms. Call?
Here.
Mr. Supalak?
Here.
Mr. Way?
Here.
Ms. Harder? Here. And Mr. Shinnok and Mr. Fishman are excused.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. We have minutes from the August 18th meeting along with the documents. I will entertain a motion to accept those into the record and approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Harder? Yes. Mr. Supalak?
Yes.
Mr. Way?
Yes.
Mr. Schneer?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, the City Council receives a recommendation from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. There are two cases eligible for the consent agenda this evening. Cases 1 and 2, Sunny Street Cafe at 7573 Sawmill Road, 22-121 AFDP and 22-122 CU. Does anyone from the Commission wish to remove these items from the consent agenda? Seeing none. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. At this time, I will entertain a motion on the first item, amended final development plan with no conditions.
So moved.
I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a motion instead of on the consent agenda for the AFDP. Do I need to? I have a motion and a second on the floor. So there, no one.
Since you have a motion and a second on the floor to approve with no conditions, Mrs. Beal can go ahead and take the roll, and then you can do the second motion on the conditional use.
Thank you. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Supalak?
Yes.
Ms. Harder? Yes. Mr. Schneer?
Yes.
Ms. Call? Mr. Way?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'll entertain a motion on the second to approve a conditional use with a single condition.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. White. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Supalak. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Harder? Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
And I imagine you're here for Sunny Street and not our wonderful discussion on solar panels. You're certainly welcome to stay and join us for our discussion, but thank you very much for your attendance this evening. All right, the final item, discussion item on our agenda this evening is a solar panel code amendment, 21-151 ADMC. This is an administrative request code amendment. The application is for an informal discussion for a future code amendment to provide regulations in regard to solar panels for residential and commercial properties. Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I'm slightly alarmed that they didn't want to talk about solar panels for this evening. So again, before the commission tonight, this has been a topic that we've had a couple of times before the Planning and Zoning Commission as well as other bodies regarding application for a code amendment for solar panels in the City of Dublin zoning code. Currently, the zoning code remains silent on this issue, and we are pursuing a code amendment to address that. In terms of dates that this has been presented before the Planning and Zoning Commission, it was originally presented in October of last year, and then again in May of 2022, discussing not only topics that we think the board should be considering about solar panels, but specifically some potential code language. Again, solar panels are not described in the City of Dublin zoning code as a specific use. So in order to accommodate this request from our public, we've been categorizing this as accessory structures. This allows for solar panels to the side and rear of properties. It does not allow for solar panels to the front of properties. So this has been a focus of conversation specifically with residential properties. In terms of additional conversations that we've had, it was also a focus at the joint work session that just recently occurred with City Council, Planning and Zoning Commission, the ARB, and BZA that took place in August, just to get basically a temperature of what these various bodies would like to do with solar panels and move forward with the code amendment. In October specifically, we did a visual preference study for the Planning and Zoning Commission to introduce this topic, talking about not only residential structures, but commercial structures and how these solar panels look and appear from different viewpoints. Currently, this is solar panels as well as other type of sustainable practices are permitted within the Bridge Street District and the West Innovation District. They're not permitted throughout the entire city. So again, that's what we're trying to tackle at this point. As part of our analysis, we did look at other communities as we typically would, not only local suburban communities, but also some surrounding states that we typically mark ourselves towards. And we're finding that there's somewhat of a balance of regulations that we're finding. Most all communities have some sort of jurisdiction on solar, wind, and geothermal regulations. In terms of local regulations, we gathered 2 other communities that address solar panels as accessory structures, similar to what we're doing. And there's also varying regulations, specifically when it deals with historic districts. So the pictures that I'm about to show the commission are pictures that we addressed in the October presentation, showing different methods of installing solar panels and what that aesthetic would look like. Specifically with commercial buildings, it's slightly easier to integrate the panels with the architectural elements of the building. So there's a little more flexibility with the commercial components of this conversation. And I think I'll just, so this is a little more pronounced, and these are getting into actual solar farms and a pronounced use of solar, opposed to it being an amendment to an existing primary use. Residential, however, has been a little bit more of a conversation for not only, again, the Planning and Zoning Commission, but City Council as a whole, showing what solar panels look like in terms of, and I'm going to be very specific about roof-mounted solar panels. This is showing the different elements that we've gathered in the aesthetics that are associated with the structures. 9 times out of 10, they're a black material. They do have a glossy appearance. At times there, in some provisions, there's, I'm going to call them lines, if you will, that make them slightly more pronounced, but they are a noticeable feature for residential applications. And these are just showing ground-mounted elements for solar panels. Again, fairly prominent. This is less of an issue for the City of Dublin, not only because we typically don't have lot sizes that accommodate ground-mounted structures, but essentially, I would say of I would say probably the last dozen requests that we've had, they've all been roof-mounted roof-mounted solar panels. So we are focusing our discussion on what the commission would like to see in terms of residential elements. We were able to present this topic to CSAC, which is a subcommittee of City Council this week. And we specifically asked them, what are they hearing from our community? What are the thoughts about permitting solar panels on residential structures? What should the Planning and Zoning Commission be considering when we do look towards a code amendment? And of course, any other considerations for the committee? And I would look to Jenny to maybe summarize that conversation briefly.
Yes, we took that to CSAC because they are overseeing the sustainability framework topic for the city. So that seemed the most applicable to take that. And they're also, like yourselves, a group of residents. So wanted to get some feedback from them about what they're hearing, from their perspective as a commission member, but also then as, neighbors in Dublin as well. So again, similar to conversations we've had before, it's on both ends of the spectrum, right? So obviously the city wanting to be sustainable and looking towards council goals as well as the sustainability framework. Some were very supportive of solar panels being permitted everywhere, but then others, obviously there's this aesthetic component, and ultimately that's sort of where it came down to, was how to incorporate these, particularly on roofs of single-family homes, if they're done well and they're grouped together. That really seemed like as long as the technology was there, and that seemed like that was a financial benefit to a homeowner, that we should look at how to do that. But it is the how to do that, and whether the front would be agreeable. There were a couple members that did not want to support that, particularly on the front. It was, again, in some locations, but still concerns about the front in other instances. So it sort of runs the gamut of the conversation that we've had. So.
And just to be clear, the last time that we presented this to the Planning and Zoning Commission, you had requested that we have more of a technical analysis of how these are installed, technology advancements and things that we should be considered. We actually had 2 guests scheduled for tonight's meeting, and unfortunately there were conflicts. So it's not as if we haven't heard what you're asking. We're still trying to keep moving forward with the code amendment, but we do acknowledge that that's something that we're due to have before you. So tonight we're asking is, in terms of a draft, if there's any type of feedback that the Planning and Zoning Commission can give us, specifically, again, like Jenny mentioned, this balance between supporting sustainability practices and aesthetics, specifically with location requirements. And again, we do acknowledge that technology is going to continue to advance, and we're going to continue to probably monitor whatever language that we adopt. And again, of course, any type of considerations that the commission has. So with that, I would love to have a conversation about what your thoughts are and how we can help move this forward.
And maybe before that, I guess I want to preface, because someone was not able to come here, we have had extensive, mostly Tammy, extensive conversations with these representatives. So I think we can definitely answer questions if you have some about what we've learned. I guess I don't want that to feel like we did a ton of research. It's just having somebody here, just unfortunately at the last minute did not work out. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you both. So because this is somewhat informal discussion, I'd like to see if we can handle the commercial separately from the residential. So if we could go commercial first and then talk specifically about that. And I'd like to concentrate both on what we want to see from a solar perspective and how we want to see it. So for instance, do we want these items coming back as part of a preliminary and final development plan for each user, for each instance, or do we want to handle them differently? So again, this is informal discussion, so we're not going to be, I'm not going to roll call and go down, but rather talk through. So I do see a couple of different opportunities in the commercial area. And how we want to tackle these, I think, is a little bit different. So I think the easiest one for all of us is a flat roof where we have it hidden. I mean, those are really easy because, well, they hide. And so the aesthetic concern that most have isn't really present for flat roof commercial buildings. I think we do need to have quality standards and placement and mounting and all of that kind of standards like we would, but that's more on the building side, less on the planning side. So any other items on flat roof commercial buildings?
So just to clarify, when you talk about putting them on a flat roof, are you assuming that they're flat? Or are you assuming that they're,
They could be canted,
can-
but they
right.
cannot be visible.
behind
So
the
they're,
parapet of
they're
the
like
building?
the mechanicals
Yeah.
where they have to be shielded. They
I
have to be
think they have
screened.
to be tilted in order to optimize their solar,
Yeah.
whatever, yeah. So
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. I think, yeah, I support that.
Yeah, that one's easy.
On that end, would they still be visible
No.
from the street? Like if you're walking, even though it's a flat roof and you've moved them up a bit? And the second question is, do they have to have mechanicals on the ground that would be mounted that match?
So I think we would require the same kind of screening as we do for mechanical, so they wouldn't be visible. And if there are any ancillary ground-mounted items, we would require the same standard. So because we're talking about roof-mounted solar, any equipment would not be solar in nature, but rather, connection to the grid or whatever, but would fall into the same screening for other mechanicals that would be ground-mounted.
And just so I'm hearing you correctly, you don't believe that they can be seen walking by,
Correct.
even if you were across the street or
Yeah, so-
any glares
So
that
there's-
would come from?
I mean, there's some practical pieces to this because that would be the same as rooftop mechanical sometimes. I mean, the goal would be that there would be a parapet and you wouldn't be able to see this, but there's going to be some instances where you might see them from some locations. Again, we can write some regulations. You can look at them and see what you
And
I
the
was gonna say,
hill,
are
the
we just-
slanting.
Are we just debating the structure of how the code gets built, i.e. residential and commercial are two different beasts? We agree.
Yeah.
Even in commercial, right, you've done a great job of itemizing stuff here. And I think too, on the spectrum of acceptable hand wave, we don't need to worry about it. If it's parapeted and mechanical equipment, much like HVAC units, yeah, go all day, right? That can pretty much be a comparable code to parapeted mechanical equipment. From there, I think we have to then, again, start to tackle each of
Agreed.
the rest of these conditions is what it comes down to.
Agreed. So I think,
So I want to take a different opinion than that. And maybe I'm jumping ahead because we're talking about flat roofs, right?
yeah, so I was doing the easy ones and then let's go,
Well-
okay, how do we allow for the less easy ones? How do we make those
But-
acceptable?
But I guess where I was going with this is visibility of a solar panel a bad thing? I mean, a mechanical equipment has a look. Solar panels have a look, right? And so I guess where I'm going is if you look at this slide, there's all different applications,
Yep.
and a lot of them you can see the solar panel. So by having one that's the easy one, you're saying is, well, yeah, we can put it on a flat roof and hide it, but I'm not sure that's necessarily where we want to go.
See, and I
So-
think we're balancing because we do have the challenge of some people object to them because of the visual.
When it,
So how can we, so if we were to jump ahead.
Yeah.
If we do flat roof, and that's easy because we have really no objections to that. And
Because
then we go to a
because it
canted.
becomes equipment, and aesthetics are concerned about aesthetics are off the board. If it becomes visible, then aesthetics of the panel is a concern.
Right, but I just want to have,
Contributing factor.
Contributing factor.
we have to have equity in the discussion, right? Because not every building's a flat roof. There's going to be all sorts of commercial buildings. So
So now if
how do
we
you build
move on,
equity?
yep, so now if we move on to a canted roof, the objection that has been most brought forward is visual, right? And so one of the ways that could be mitigated is by allowing them on non-street facing, non-adjacent parcel, that kind of screening so that the people who are visually impacted are the people who are using the building. So I don't necessarily say that's what we need to do, but that's where we'll jump off in discussion. So for non-flat roof-mounted commercial use of solar panels, what are the commission's thoughts?
Mr. Schneer wanted to go, so.
Yeah, I wonder if, thinking about this just now, if we could come up first with some sort of spreadsheet, taxonomy, spectrum, continuum, I just ran out of words, that lists every every logical potential. So in there would be, for example, things we just talked about, a flat roof. At the other end are, or not the other end, but another would be residential integrated, the Tesla kind of solar panels.
So I kind of have that for the residential portion.
Yeah, so that we could see all the, and then we could sort of stack rank them and come up with solutions or approaches, to each of them. But maybe you have that, but I feel like, I think trying to just define, like, I mean, there's not 100, there's 20.
No, well, but to your point, I think that's fundamentally what we're trying to do is lift out the taxonomy and then start to, even if we're jumping to a case study that's easy, right? On the spectrum of easy, do we need a lot of provisions around, say, flat roof that's parapeted? No, that one seems like it probably could be built off of previous code versions, right? But to your point, I think that's where we're going. Is it commercial and residential, and then the sort of taxonomy from there is at the highest level residential? I think you said something right. I'm going to use your verbatim word because it was perfectly placed relative to I feel like the last time we had this. We also have to future-proof this, and it's not just dealing with the stuff we know today. Like I actually wrote on my left side at the highest level taxonomy, there's the things we know, right? And obviously to the point of we can build specific provisions for, you pick it, all the things we see pictured or the things we know, including but not limited to flat roofs, pitched roofs, shingled solar panels. But this technology is accelerating so fast. There are a wealth of things we don't know, and how do we future-proof it in a way, like, even at that? So is there a provision, while we can get very specific once we have the taxonomy of the existing stuff and build to it and really protect, everybody in the city well, can we also build a provision that's generally overarching? Right.
Yeah,
the things we don't accommodate already in said code will come to us because.
Well,
so I have two items. I want to kind of jump ahead and then go backwards if we can. So residential to me was a little bit easier, even though I wanted to save it for last, because I listed out, we have roof integrated solar shingles, and I purposely call them solar shingles. Roof mounted panels, framed and frameless. Ground mounted solar panels, 18 inches or less off the ground. Accessory structure roof mounted. Standalone solar structures or greater than 18 inches. And then windows and things like that. And as I was looking through, I almost think that roof integrated solar shingles should be treated as shingles. If they are the fundamental, if they are the integrity that gives, the item that gives the roof integrity, then we treat them like shingles and we treat them under roof code. Windows, if they're solar windows, we treat them as windows. We don't treat them as solar panels. They have an additional use, but we treat them so that way we do kind of future-proof. If they come out with stucco or paneling or anything else that is solar in nature, we add it into the paneling. We add it into the whatever code it actually falls into, rather than having a solar that can't keep up with technology.
It's well put.
And so that was jumping all the way to the residential. I'd like to jump all the way back to the commercial. And if I could seek clarification from staff, we're looking to get a little bit more into the details as to what we want to see as a recommendation for a code amendment, because ultimately that would be a city council decision. So we're challenged with how do we want to treat this? How do we want to see this in code, so that we on the Planning and Zoning Commission can apply it to the applications that come forward?
Yes, I think that's fair. And I think your feedback today will help us sort of figure out how to draft this. I mean, there's lots of other Central Ohio examples, which we included in your packet, which I think we can use, but we also have the benefit of having these contacts. So I think we could take your suggestions, draft some code language, and also vet that through the solar groups that we're talking to, and then they could potentially come and speak to, what their professional recommendation is as part of that moving forward before it goes to council, because it's going to come back to you.
Yeah.
So on the commercial side, again, back to broad strokes, I saw mounted solar panels, and I kept that very broad. And then that's where we started off with the flat roof, where there aren't a lot of objections to that. But having enough discussion around that to understand how do we want to treat canted roofs or any other kind of roof besides the easy ones. And then I saw architecturally integrated. How are we going to treat that? But usually we see lots of detail in a plan. So just like art, just like different materials that maybe aren't covered in our code, having development language that calls out that we can handle that as part of a plan while not being arbitrary in our discussions. So we have to have enough detail in there. And then accessory structures, whether that's landscaping integrated or parking structure, or any of those, if it's the trash enclosure and it has whatever that is, the ancillary kind of uses. That's kind of how I broke down the commercial side of things. Again, because we don't see residential and individual application, we may see a subdivision.
I'm gonna repeat it back to you,
Okay.
right? Staring at the examples we have, and I really fundamentally like it. I think if we can define mounted, right? So on the right side, intuitively, I would articulate those are mounted.
Mm-hmm.
On the left side are integrated, right? So then if we get to definitions of those, and the one that's sort of,
And
I guess they're both careful on the left side, like, well, or could I argue they're mounted
And
in lieu of integrated?
I
But
dare say that the one on the bottom left, I would not necessarily call integrated. It looks like a non-structural attachment. Whereas the one in the middle left looks like it's integrated into, like, that is the wall. The one on the bottom left almost looks like that's on the wall.
It's a rain screen.
I was going to say, unfortunately, if we go there, there's a lot of rain screens. There's brick rain screens in this, all over the place too, that aren't really structural. So I agree with you.
And
I see what you're seeing, but I think you're onto something in the integrated and the definition of integrated and how do we define that and the definition of mounted. These are clearly not mounted on the left side.
but additionally, I'll object to my own objection
Yeah, go ahead.
and say the bottom left one would come before us, and we would say, just like we would if it were the stucco or the siding or the anything else on the wall.
It's facade
It's-
review, right?
Yeah,
Material, facade
right.
materials.
It needs to be loved on.
Yeah, agreed. It could be better, but I do think there's something really nice about mounted and integrated if we can get those definitions right. And then yes, accessory structures are a whole different sort of animal, and that gives us a taxonomy on the commercial side, which I think will still go towards. We do need a whiteboard. I actually thought, like, could we do this in? Yeah, this is one of those meetings. Could we do this in executive session and
Whiteboard?
They'd love that.
Stack of Post-its about this tall.
I just wanted to add to the commercial thing that everything you listed for residential applies to the commercial too. If it's the small commercial building, that looks like it's all windows, roof, shingles, all of those could
Yeah.
apply.
The only one I didn't see is shingles. I didn't see shingles on a major, and maybe that's just my own.
But it could.
Commercial buildings with
could,
shingles on
It could, and I liked where you were going on that, in that let it be then somehow punted into the roofing material.
Right.
To it, we can still itemize it probably in the solar code and recognize solar shingles, solar windows, because they do integrate photovoltaics into actual exterior windows, right? And so we can have stipulations in the right part.
Yep.
So I have a technical question and a concern, and I think this is part of the debate about not putting solar on street facing roofs or whatever, because I've heard some evidence that if you put the solar on the wrong side of the roof, it doesn't perform as well. In fact, it may not perform at all. And so I think the whole purpose of doing solar is for performance, and I guess I'm more open to not letting that be a driver.
Former life, I challenge, why not windmills then? Also green, also technology. Why not allow windmills in the front yard? We had, I'm channeling 8 years ago.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, I'm not debating right now whether that's right or wrong. I'm saying there's a performance part to solar
Agreed.
that we should be sensitive
Yeah,
to.
people will, if they can't put it on if the southern side of their house is the front side, they will be dissuaded from putting them in at all.
Right.
So,
If-
Unless there's an
codes-
advancement
if-
of the technology which then allows
Right.
smaller windows or smaller
But that-
photometrics to be,
That's assuming that we say that it's aesthetically not appropriate to do that.
and
And-
that is part of the concern that has been brought up not only in our city, but other cities as well.
And I would start off by saying solar panels are beautiful,
so if
but that's a point of view, right? Not everybody has the same point of view.
So, and this is just for informational purposes, we have a couple of cases that are going before our Board of Zoning Appeals. And as part of their package submissions, solar companies have provided an analysis, and usually it can function if it's to the side or the rear. It just, like you said, it doesn't function as well, and it's more costly. So I just assumed it wouldn't work at all, but there is some functionality to it. It's just to what capacity that happens.
And functionality is whether there's a return on the investment, right?
Yeah, sure, of course, right.
Okay, so if we could go back to commercial buildings. So I think that, and I'm thinking from a code draft perspective, I think that flat roofs are relatively easy. So if we go on to pitched roofs, point well taken that all of the other types apply, but now again, we're talking, if we could first tackle the traditional, whether it's framed or frameless panels. Is the commission generally supportive of any placement, percentage of roof coverage, any elevation off of the roof? If we could do kind of just broad strokes there. I think the number that we got before for ground mounted was 18 inches, but I don't remember if we had one for roof mounted off of the roof. Recommended not more than.
Yeah, all of our provisions end at 18 inches at the current point.
I think the language in the codes, the other cities' codes that were provided in terms of solar panels going above roof line or hanging over eave
Below.
line. I
Agreed.
agree totally that that's appropriate. I have another aesthetic thing, and again, this when I look at this, it just bothers me is the staggered cells on a roof that's has a whatever you call that too, valleys in it, and it makes the roof look really busy. But when you just have a rectangular shape or square shape or something, it's much cleaner, and I wonder if there's a way to.
So like
Well, again, I'm talking about
Contiguous
commercial,
with-
but I'm thinking residential,
Yep.
primarily. But
So you're looking at the bottom right.
yeah, right.
And you're even in the image we see two setups. We see one that is
A rectangle.
a rectangle, and then one is
Right,
it's something or other.
And again, this is way up in the air. This is on a two-story building. Is that right? And so probably
Maybe
you
a
can't.
third.
You probably can see it somewhere, but
again.
I mean, it's going to be much
residential.
more prominent on residential, and that's a bigger concern than.
Yeah, and I've seen them where they're not any shape. They're just as much as the surface of the roof could cover. And
Which would be-
panel, which I how about this off the cuff? I agree with you. The rectangle is more attractive.
Or if it actually fits whatever shape the roof is, like it mimics the shape of the roof.
So in the Bexley example, that is one of the requirements. The configuration and profile of the assembly shall be complementary to the roof line. Installation should minimize the number of corners and should avoid complexity and non-symmetry. So I mean, it's looking at that, making that rectangular, like, so it's not overly complex. And on some of those residential examples, I think there was two where there's like 4 and then 2 and then,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
very,
wondering if we could use the word concentrated, let's see if I can get a picture.
I actually think the Bexley language, what is that, 2C? I think that accomplishes what the request was. It's pretty darn clear.
It's a relationship to the plane of the roof. If you just some kind of a consistent, where you have roofs that are all different shapes because of valleys and stuff like that. Some are very complex, and the solar panels could get just crazy in terms of trying to fill it up. So something that regularizes. That's normalizes.
Less busy.
Yeah.
Less busy is what I think we're all looking for with that
And-
too.
And,
Yeah.
and placement wise, I still don't want them on the front of the house. Personal opinion, viewable from the front. Not a fan unless it's an integrated shingle. If it's obviously a solar panel, frameless or framed,
Again, if it's mounted, it's a mounted.
Correct.
Is there a capability of when you're doing shingles, either a home or a business, that they can be like it's a regular shingle and it's a solar shingle, and those are all integrated together so that the front and the back
Yes.
match and it doesn't look like there are panels
There,
at all?
there
So,
are. But in the case that it's integrated, then I don't care if it's on the front of the house or the back of the house. If it
So I think
looks
that
like
is a
roof,
that's a distinction that I think is important for us to
Yep.
put out there, and I think that would be, yeah. I'd
And
be in
so that's
favor.
why I wanted to punt the shingles and the windows, anything that belongs in the other code. We're not treating that technically like a solar panel.
I would like to see what the shingles look like, because if they have a different look to them, if they have a shinier sheen or something seems to be thicker, well, I guess I'm not seeing this, right, but to me, that has like a different shingle look than what I'm used to. And I can't see it up close, but
Yeah, but that,
I would want to see what that look like.
But we have metal roofs, we have, all
Oh,
different
certainly,
types of roofs.
certainly.
And the Tesla ones look more like, almost like the clay shingles,
Okay,
at least
okay.
some of them.
Yeah, I would like to see the product, but that
Agreed.
would be new.
So that's interesting. I'm just thinking through this argument about front. So as opposed to say you can't do anything on the front, it could be that you have to use a shingle.
Yep.
If you want to do solar, you
Yep.
have to use that so that it aesthetically fits in, or you can use a panel on the back.
Traditional panels on the rear.
That would be,
Yeah.
kind of give people some
Pro
flexibility. I know that-
solar, but.
What's that?
Pro solar.
Yeah,
that
right.
Consideration is on the front, it has to be.
Integrated.
Do you know how much more it is to put shingles on
Oh,
versus?
Totally depends. You can spend more on panels than shingles, or you can spend more on shingles than panels.
It is exponentially more expensive. And all of the companies that we've been talking to, none of them provide shingles. So that's less of a conversation that I've had with these companies. And ironically, I originally thought that there would be a couple of companies that we were dealing with. It's not the case. I've probably talked to a dozen companies, and they're usually roofing companies. So it's not as if this is an expertise that they started out with. And typically speaking, again, probably more information than you want, but most of the applicants that we're seeing are coming to this conclusion because they're doing roof repairs. And so it's a natural conversation for them to have to start modifying this. But again, I haven't had any exposure to the shingles conversation.
So do we want to continue on residential and then jump back into commercial? Okay, so if we're looking at front view has to be integrated, rear view can be mounted, has to be contiguous, are there any other considerations that you'd like to consider when it comes to roof mounted shingle, roof mounted solar?
Can I offer an extreme?
Sure.
I looked at two, I was looking at two, we're not the first folks to deal with this. And who would be the toughest? Where would the regulations be the most stringent? And how do they handle it? And where would there be an incredible conflict between sustainability and aesthetics? So on the latter, Martha's Vineyard, which is in the news today, but think about Martha's Vineyard, take the politics out, but a place like Martha's Vineyard, and there's many like that. Their code has basically a committee that reviews each application. So they don't have, which poses, we try to get away from that because we like to give some guidance so it's not left.
And we only have one THAD.
Right. Kiowa, which I would think would be really strict, a place like Kiowa or Hilton Head or, solar panels may be incorporated into the roofscape or installed on an ancillary structure, provided views are screened from neighboring properties. Solar panels may not be rack mounted unless integrated into the roof design using roof wells or parapets. External piping is not permitted. finials must be approved in advance of installation. That's all they say.
But it can't be visually accessed.
Yeah, which
is
I
the
mean,
biggest.
which sounds, at first blush, sounds pretty innocuous, but if you can see it, I mean, like, you could be out your second story bedroom window looking at your neighbor's roof and you see it. So it's actually seemingly very restrictive in
Yep.
practice.
Agreed.
How could you possibly screen? Yeah.
They are screened, right? They're each place is surrounded by a forest is what it comes down to. So they have that ability, but some of these examples, yeah, they couldn't possibly screen
Right.
without mature trees.
So it's de facto prohibiting it.
Yeah.
All right, so any more on residential roof mounted? Residential primary residence roof mounted. I'll even clarify even more.
So the picture in the upper right corner, which has panels on the roof plane, but then it has this other panel that's propped up.
Can't be more than 18 inches. It appears that it's still on a roof structure, but maybe just a single story, whereas the other one's on the second story.
Right. I didn't think we talked about that.
We haven't yet. So we'll do roof mounted, we'll do ground mounted, we'll do accessory structure and standalone.
I'm just flagging that as an issue to me. I could see it flat on a roof, but when you start propping it up and it's now changing the roof, kind of the character of the architecture.
Do you want a tighter, the 18 inches? I mean, the 18 inches is allowing that. Do you want it a tighter distance, or do you want it to match the plane of the roof?
So we're assuming that's an accessory structure and it's a flat roof and they're having to do that.
I was thinking it was either the first story over here and this is the second story that we're seeing, or that's a garage.
It looks like a flat.
Connected. Well, in any case, I mean, either we're starting to solve for, again, let's get specific. Either it's 18 inches or we go tighter on it, right? Which would drastically reduce that, or we specifically articulate and again, this is for paneled, or as, I don't know, somebody just said racked panels.
Well,
Or do we articulate has to be parallel to the roof plane
And I think
at a distance of max X, right?
I think we're affecting performance if we restrict the canted nature.
yeah,
So I think that there ought to be some wiggle room, but not necessarily broad wiggle room.
look at that upper right picture. So there's the top, there's one plane to the right that matches the plane. Are we saying that's sort of okay? But the one above it, the roof to
Is
the
less agreeable, yeah.
This
is
is
less
also-
agreeable.
yeah.
So are we gonna,
see those.
yeah.
I think 18 inches is pretty high. So
Generous, yeah.
Well, again, those are being oriented towards the sun, but going against the plane of the roof. And I think
Yes.
to me, that's a no-no.
Yeah.
see, and I could see it within, 8, 10, 12 inches, but not 18 inches where it's,
But it's going against the slope of the roof. And that's like totally just, to me, disruptive to the whole architectural character of
but if it's on the back of the house. And nobody can see it but the property owner.
Could you see it in the front?
the look onto their house.
Another row and column on the spreadsheet, front of house versus back of house.
Yeah, front of house, I think the consensus, I think, was integrated.
Mhm.
Back of house
Mhm.
mounted. Right now, the discussion point is 18 inches. Are we okay with that? And plane of the solar panels, do they have to match the slope and orientation of the roof?
And we can probably get some clarity on that from a practical, like, installation standpoint. I mean, and I also want to be mindful that we have to enforce this
Yes.
and interpret this. So the more complicated it gets, the harder it becomes for
Well, I
us
would-
to do that.
To the point, but I think it's less complicated if
Yeah.
we say it's got to be coplanar with the roof plane, max separation distance, top of panel to the, top of surface of roof is X, and we keep it tight. And then if there are, where I'm going is if we were drafting, that would be my advocacy, right? Coplanar, tight. And
I
then
would take that.
if when there is a review of practicality and or alternate codes out there, we'd be amenable to, I think,
Absolutely.
reassessing, but if that can work, I think that would be.
Yep,
Mhm.
agreed.
We also want to add in that if you put all this on the back of your house, but you're walking in the front of the house and they can see the back of something, that would not be okay either too. So just making sure that the back is not seen from the front,
Yep. And
that clarity.
I think the Bexley
Yes. Yeah,
kind of
you're right.
code calls that out. All right, so I think we have pretty broad strokes and pretty specific direction for residential roof mounted. Staff, do you have any questions for residential roof mounted?
So just to be clear, if it's to the front of the property, you're asking that that the term be used integrated into the roof line. Is that correct?
Integrated, no mounting, whatever we're defining, and we have to define them.
I would say,
Mounted are not acceptable.
and I would actually go back to definitions and say solar panels are non-integrated. They are mounted to the surface of a structure. Solar shingles or roof solar is integrated. That's the thing that has integrity. That's what makes the roof, is not mounted to the roof. And then treat those as two totally
could-
separate things.
In terms of future proofing, to your point, I think we could say that basically a material or surface that generates electricity that is part of the structure. Well, we got to wordsmith this, but basically it means if it's not counted, it's not solar. So solar doesn't mean it's capable of generating electricity. Solar means it's separate. It generates electricity and it is not a part of the material. So there could be stucco, as you just said. There could be solar generating paint, So if it's that,
It's not solar panels.
Agreed to it, but to it, even in the way you describe that, right? I could argue again, this is where I go, rain screens are just a screen that can actually pop off, right? Solar, and actually one of the integrated versions is an actual rain screen, probably hanging on clips, right? The one on the bottom left is probably, actually both of them on the left side are probably rain screens. So they're just a panel that's sort of clipped on to it. The definitions are going to have to really be good.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to. At some
And
point.
I would consider those design elements. Those there.
Agreed.
And luckily, commercial code is different than residential code.
So back to the full proofing, I'm thinking about, I think what we have in mind right now is people putting solar panels on their asphalt shingles on their roof, right? They're attaching them. But wonder if somebody's designing a house and the roof is a solar panel. There is no shingles.
Yeah, that's why we want to treat
So
it
that-
totally separate. We want to treat the
Okay.
roof
Because-
itself as roof.
Right.
And whether it has energy generating properties or not, it's still a roof and we're going to treat it like a roof.
Right. Because that
Solar
could be
panels.
the future, that people are they're not doing shingles. I mean,
Correct.
you're
Yeah,
building a roof.
to it, I would articulate that is integrated because it's not
Yeah.
to your point. The solar panel is additive to, say, the roof, right?
Right.
I mean, the
maybe there's
sticky part is when we
there
get
could be
to rain
window screens that, that are capable of generating.
Yeah.
So that's our.
And I just want to say for the record that I am not against them on the front, but we're building a consensus here. So I'm going with the flow, but
Perfect.
I'm not against that. But
And luckily, code is living, breathing. So if we don't get it right the first or the second time,
Motion to vote Kim off the island.
I just have to vote my
Oh,
conscience.
sorry, that's
Okay,
for executive.
What about
session.
detached?
so now we're going
Detached
to,
accessory structure?
yep. So now let's do, if I can do ground mounted first. So ground mounted solar panels. If we're going to allow them, so these could be, and if we want to tackle commercial and residential in the same, or if we want to separate them, ground mounted could be landscaping integrated. You could have a post, you could have whatever, or it could be something that is non-accessory structure. I have that one called out separately. So if you want to put a pergola and solar over the top of that, or if you want to put a shed and have, I don't think we allow sheds, but put solar on top of that, treating those separately. What is the consensus of ground mounted? Number one, is it allowed in the front yard?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Ground mounted, is it allowed in the front yard?
Residential?
Correct.
No.
I think no as well.
I'll dissent, take a fine point. If it could be screened? Do we allow, okay, let me ask this. Do we allow air conditioning units in front yards?
No.
No.
Okay,
Or
I take back my dissent.
Okay, perfect. So residential, no ground mounted in the front yard. So now let's go rear yard. Allowed?
Or so,
Again, non-accessory use
Yes.
or non-accessory structure.
but I think we
I'm
need
o-
to limit size.
I'm okay with it. I
Screened
think
and
we limit
setbacks.
size and I think we limit screen, by screening.
Screens, setbacks,
Height.
Yes.
But
And
the other
height.
code said like 6 to 8 feet were the range, and
Yeah, well, I have pergola kind of standalone. If it's 6 feet off the ground, then I imagine it's a cover, right?
yeah, I worry that if we limit the height too much, again, we're gonna, to your point, a freestanding pergola in the backyard is.
See, and I would say something like ground mounted structures no more than 48 inches off the ground or something like that, so that we're actually talking about these things. Or we say they have to be 18 inches or less off the ground.
I found it interesting. You can go on Amazon and you can purchase for $2.99 with a portable function that you take with you. You can use it camping, but people were placing them in their yards. And so is this what we would be, concerned with and so forth?
I don't think portable we're talking about because planning, if it's portable, it's non-structural,
Non-permanent.
it's not permanent. So therefore we wouldn't
So that would be fine.
like a
Because it
bicycle
is
in
a
the yard.
structure that looks like panels and it looks like something that would be placed in your yard, but the word portable is right by it.
Yeah,
So it's
I
something to
don't know
think
that
about.
we'd have enough information to.
so when I think of ground mounted solar, I think of the solar panels being on a pole, and a lot of them actually rotate and
Rotate.
follow the sun. And is that what you're
See,
used?
I'm thinking these
yeah.
guys.
That's, you said you were talking about a pergola, which to me,
Oh, I'll
that's like
treat
a whole.
that totally differently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the pergola and accessory structures I have grouped together. So I'm talking just.
Yeah.
So are we saying, with this, are we saying that these would be permitted in a side or rear yard if they were screened?
If they were screened, I think is what we're saying. And then if you could provide
Here's a
height off of the ground, we want to make sure that we're, number one,
Here.
keeping safety in mind. Number two, obviously, the visual aspect has come up a few times, the performance, we've considered all of that.
So screening is tricky because we have
Because you can't screen
limitations on
from the
how
sun.
tall screens can be.
Well, and, well, I have to say the screen has to be at least as high as the solar panel at its highest point.
Of screening? Are you talking about fixed screening or landscape screening? Or that can be anything, right?
Well, we would, I think in this instance, it would be a landscape screening. We would not let you have a fence around
No.
this.
You can't do
I
a fence
agree.
over 6 feet anyway, right?
You
4
can't
feet.
do even a 6 foot.
Or 4 feet.
Could we borrow from air conditioning units for this?
We don't
The screening?
require screening on residential properties of your air conditioning units. Unless
Oh,
your development tech said something.
You
but
do in the historic
Can we borrow
district?
the commercial text?
Historic district, but historic district also covers solar panels in a different way.
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
Right. If we look at what the historic district requires for air conditioning screening, maybe that could be,
I like that. I
As
like
a
that
starting
as a
point.
jumping off point.
Okay.
Okay,
But doesn't that, so if a solar panel is 6 to 8 feet tall, I guess landscape's the only thing you can use to screen it.
correct.
And we don't have to require, would require something is that tall installed so that it's screened immediately?
Correct.
So that it would have to be, then we have to start talking about the height of the landscape material that's,
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think these standalone units, we're gonna want super, super tall. So they're gonna do some
that's
research
why,
and bring.
that's why I'm saying we should set the height of,
Yep, I like that
then
idea.
come back and
Yeah.
talk about the screening.
So Tammy, I don't know if you heard that, but I think the general consensus is standalone solar panels we want to keep on the shorter side so that they can be screened by landscaping, and we're not asking people to buy $1,000 times 10 trees to surround, or times 10, we used arborvitaes today, so. By the way, my husband calls those morbidaes because they always die. Sorry, Kay, I thought you'd like that one.
They do.
Okay. Any other call outs on ground mounted residential solar panels?
Standard array of setbacks would still all
Yes,
apply.
agreed.
Do we need to worry about proximities
Yeah,
to primary structure or anything like that? Are we
I don't
worried?
think so.
Wouldn't
not
that be
for
a
the
building
primary.
code issue about, yeah. And I think there should be something about the supports of them.
And do they count as lot coverage, toward lot coverage?
For the 4-inch pole they're on?
Well, I'm thinking if somebody decides to do this times 2 or 3,
Yeah, I got
and
it.
this is their landscaping underneath it. So I'm pointing to the, Stella d'Oro daylily right there, single daylily, poor little daylily.
Again, I'd throw out in the historic district, which is very tight on lot coverage, as I will attest to, they don't count air conditioning units, for example,
Okay,
or generators.
just something to consider there. Okay, anything else on ground mounted residential?
Just to recap, Mr. Supelak, we are suggesting that they be within required setbacks, correct? Good, okay.
Yeah, I that's what I was asking. I was not advocating for additional sort of protocol around that.
Do we want to add anything about if it's a side yard that faces a principal street or some, where that's higher, more visible?
Yes, agreed.
That would need a higher scrutiny in terms of materiality or.
Well, and screening
supports or-
again. I mean,
I mean,
I think screening.
you're articulating a screening issue again, right?
Or I don't know, I know we have language about other things when you views from a principal street, right? So it'd be,
I think entirely screened, and we cover all bases.
I feel like if we're gonna do that, we would consider that a front. Like if you're on a public right of way and you're on a corner lot, you have 2 fronts. So you wouldn't be permitted to have it
but
in
it's
your front.
technically a side yard, right?
But not
from
according to
not
our
the way
code,
we would interpret it.
Not how we,
like a front yard.
Ah, really? Okay.
All right, so should we jump to commercial ground mounted? So I want to treat these a little bit differently. Ground mounted commercial where that is the use rather than commercial ground mounted where that's an accessory. I've seen commercial where that's all that's on the lot it's a solar farm.
Right.
Do we want to allow or disallow?
Allow.
Yeah, I think disallow if that's the only use.
I think we could handle that. That I don't know how you feel, but that would be a use question. So if we don't have it as a freestanding use, that would not be permitted.
I like that. Okay, so then commercial ground mounted. Do we worry about frontage the same way that we would in residential?
Yes.
Okay, well, I could be convinced of that. I'm seeing 4 head nods, so, okay. Screening still applies?
Yes.
All right, I think we're good with commercial ground mounted unless anybody has anything else to add there.
Do you have the same height restriction?
I think so.
Well,
They're going to come back to us with recommendations on height, and we're going to require screening.
the only issue with that, if it's a commercial property, is potentially a lot more square footage, so
Agreed.
you want something bigger.
Mhm.
So, and again,
More
they could be
dense.
1-story buildings or they could be 10-story buildings, right? But
Mhm.
so do we let them to go with larger,
Yeah.
right? Do we set a larger standard?
So I think consideration for landscaping screening a little bit differently from residential, from commercial, at least as far as the how much and how big. All right, accessory structure. So I have accessory structure roof mounted, and we could talk about side mounted and that sort of thing. So if we do residential first, so I'm thinking I'm thinking accessory structure are your sheds, your detached garage, but also your pergola that is something that is a structure itself. And I think we could allow them. I think that they have the same kind of standards, has to be in the rear. And if it's on a garage, same height requirements, same contiguous requirements, same everything else. Any objections to that? Any additional discussion? Okay. Accessory structure for commercial. What about parking lot coverages? I'm thinking the hospital where they have the covered slot, covered parking positions, that could be a front. If it's screened, I'm okay with having some solar generation power up there.
Is that different than the first one we talked about? I thought you said parking lots. The first one I thought was parking lots.
I don't think we talked about parking lots yet.
All right.
I think I summed it up when we were jumping around.
So now we're talking about putting solar panels over parking spaces in a parking lot. Yes.
I'm for that.
I'm for it.
All for that.
And there's some consideration. Again, we don't want, the big 24-inch, cantilever that's on a flat plane roof structure. There's some considerations there. But again, we'd want to see that as part of the preliminary development plan and final development plan.
So obviously we can't screen those,
Correct.
but
But
we could require heavier perimeter screening.
we could also kind of parapet.
I was going to say, there's a certain amount of some of this on a large scale commercial property. You're going to get a wealth of the perimeter screening regardless. You're also going to get put it this way. The one we're looking at is probably, here's the property land right next to it, right? So the screening and the adjacency, the proximity is part of the problem. In the commercial property, there's a good bet. You pick a different.
And if you screen that,
That parking, can you go back one?
Well, and where I'm going is
Back.
by sheer proximity and sort of like the perimeter, it ends up with a good amount of buffering regardless, right? By scale.
See, I love the solar vehicular canopy. Doesn't even look like it's solar. It looks like a canopy.
it's a charging
So I
station.
think that if we bring that down even more as far as tolerances for how elevated so whether that's integrated or not integrated, if we tighten that up, we treat it differently.
That's interesting because technically I would probably offer that is probably the roof surface.
Mhm.
It is not a panel, a plot mounted on a roof surface. It is, you can see the structure, the structure of it, right? The main ribs and then the purlins run across and then probably the panels. That's all it is.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wonder
It's a frame.
with that edge,
Set them in
with that
frame.
edge, the top right, it almost makes me wonder if it's separate. Because it looks like you have the ribs.
But I don't know why you wouldn't put, my point is you wouldn't put a roof structure, you wouldn't put a roof on this
Roof.
structure. You would just put the panels on it.
Right.
And they do the jobs to it by our own sort of the definition we're sort of mentally building. And it is the roof plane.
I'm good with that.
To it is actually integrated.
But I also think with those accessory structures, I don't necessarily think if we allow on a flat roof 18 inches off the surface and not exceeding the parapet, I don't necessarily think that we'd want something like this with ribbing and no parapet to be able to go 18 inches off. I think we'd want that tighter so that it looks like it's part of the roof, even if it's not part of the roof. Does that make sense?
No, not necessarily.
So in this type of a structure, we wouldn't necessarily want the framed solar panels 18 inches off the surface of that.
Off the surface of what?
Up this canopy. If this were not solar, if this were structural in nature with we wouldn't want it 18 inches off.
I think
We'd
that
want to tighten that up.
I think that would come out relative to, again, we'd see this commercial property and this commercial project relative to that. So we'd see some of that detail and sort of comment on it at that time, but I don't know how
I think just with specifically parking coverages, I think we want to tighten up the distance there. Because I don't see any of us seeing anything with 18 inches separation between solar panels and a canopy saying, ooh, yes, we're good. All right. So I have standalone, accessory, ground-mounted, roof-mounted, roof integrated, commercial and residential, and we covered non-roof like windows and everything else. What did we miss?
So should there be any conversation about, we talked briefly about shapes. In terms of like like I said, the concentration of panels, some of the applications that I've seen, they'll have a couple of panels on one roof line and then a majority of them on another. And that makes it more obvious because your eye is being drawn to those 2 or 3 or 5, whatever. So if it feels as if they're more consolidated, it seems like it gives a better appearance. Do we want to talk about concentration or size or shape or anything else aesthetically speaking, even if it's to the side or rear?
So again, looking at the Bexley recommendation where it says complementary to the roof line. While that is somewhat ambiguous, it could be, whether that's concentrated or equitably distributed across the roof line or anything like that. So do we want to get, so what I'd hate to do is have one homeowner, because their roof is kind of more the European traditional, where they don't have a big flat surface, it's a hip roof, and therefore I would hate to say, well, because of your roof type, you absolutely cannot have any solar panels or you get this big, versus someone else who's in kind of a Eastern traditional where it's a solid roof, well, they get all of their solar panels. In either case, it has to be complementary to the roof line, and it has to be on the back surface if it's solar panel. And so I think at least from my perspective, I think we're covered with complementary with the rest of those guys.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if there's 3 different panels on 3 different roof planes. I'm trying to think what's the aesthetic downside of that.
Well, I'm looking
Well-
at this bottom one.
Well, again, because they're not rectangular. They're not
Exactly.
that
But
fun.
if they were both rectangles, just the 6 or the 8 panels, I'd be just fine with that.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that kind of terracotta one in the middle.
Right.
Like Jenny said, we're just looking at the enforceability of this once we do adopt the language, so.
Those to me are not complementary of the roof line, because that edge is triangular in nature. So if you're going to go complementary, you either go the rectangular portion of the left side or the triangular. And if you can't do that, an L shape is not complementary because there is no L shape there.
Do we have to consider if we're looking at concentration, the output, the efficiency, if we start regulating number of panels, size of panels, independent of location of panels, and concentration of panels, that could impact the output.
Agreed. Anything else we missed?
Probably.
That you know of right now?
I had one little question about trees. Does that become an issue where you would see people taking down trees, or just, I thought.
Yeah, I don't know that we've encountered that, but that makes perfect sense, that especially on residential applications, when we're dealing with smaller sites, that could very well start to become a conversation, so.
Would that be more in the application, however, not in the code of solar panels, which is?
I mean, and the code addresses, I mean, you could remove trees on your single family residential lot regardless of whether you're doing that. I mean, we would not obviously encourage that, but they can do that anyway with the permit, so.
Yeah.
It's a good point, though. Yeah.
All right. Anything else we want to discuss? This won't be the last time, obviously, we're seeing this code. But anything else we want to discuss? It's nice to have the opportunity to talk about solar panels and to see how we can encourage that in the city of Dublin more.
We talked about the height of them in both the residential and commercial, but do we actually come up with a height, or are we letting?
I think they're going back and
You're
doing a
gonna
little bit of research
do that,
on
okay.
recommendations, not just what other cities have done, but the resources that they have.
And
connection to the
again,
solar
if you look at
industry.
the codes the codes did have, well, I think it was like 6 to 8 feet. So I think there's some models out there that we can draw from.
Perfect.
I'm not sure this is for this committee, but maybe for the city to follow and watch the trends of this. But if you have a neighborhood that one side you can have solar panels, but the other side, because you're in the front, you can't, does that change the value of the homes there? And that just may be something just for the city to kind of keep track of, to follow along.
So not to go off on a tangent, but I was thinking the exact same thing. And this is, I think, way out of our purview.
Agreed.
But the ability for homeowners to contribute to a solar or a renewable program that the city might offer, and maybe the city decides that it might want to do a solar farm out in the innovation district. And if people could somehow contribute to that and then get I don't know. I'm just trying to see how can you feel like you're being a good citizen and you're promoting these activities when you might have limitations on your property and you can't do it.
Yeah, what we can do is we can take that. So Mark and I meet with our liaison to the city council, who it would be in their purview more so, and usually not just the city, it would be a city, state, ed kind of sponsored thing, but we'll take that back to city council.
And even to the point where all of city facilities, how many solar panels does the city's facilities have right now?
Unfortunately, not.
Yeah.
We've even spoke to the schools about supporting this as well. So
Yeah.
that's an area we can.
So
we can get behind.
all those public facilities, whether it's schools or, city government buildings, we start thinking about a strategy where those could contribute. And then maybe there's some kind of a pool that people can be part of and feel like they're contributing.
Similar to like a co-op program, basically.
Yeah, the only advice, so on Ms. Harder's point about trends, and there are so many agencies leasing, and you have a lease, only it's not owned property, that there's big Pandora's box there that I don't necessarily think the city wants to get involved in, but we'll certainly pass it along to city council, who would be more in tune with that.
And I wanted to add one other thing is that, and I'm sure others have seen, there's been a lot of social media around solar and people wanting to put solar in, but the city's against it. I think there's an opportunity with this legislation or whatever to put it out there that no, we support it, immensely, and we want to kind of work with you to.
And I
we
think
wanna
the
be ready.
messaging is there. So public affairs, if we could have the public affairs instead of reacting to agendas or minutes that are published out to the media, but saying, in an effort to become an even greener community, in an effort to more, propose even more sustainable energy use, and, leave that to public affairs, but encourage them to get in front of and
We can do
manage the
that.
messaging.
And that was discussed at the joint work session too, about doing something at the fall HOA meeting. So I think that's an opportunity to talk about how we're supporting this and how we're doing that. So.
Correct.
I mean, and even the idea that we're pursuing a code amendment means we're interested. I mean, right now, our biggest challenge is if someone were to, right now we're categorizing these as accessory structures. If someone were to appeal that decision of how we're operating, if that were to get overturned, then we're just not permitting them at all. So
Well,
we're at least moving in the right direction.
And that's where I'd like to control the messaging, because a lot of people see, hey, Planning and Zoning Commission is entertaining a code amendment. They are restricting, and that is the opposite of what we're doing. We're trying to free up the restrictions on residential and commercial solar. All right. How's the solar horse doing? We beat the horse. All right. Any final discussion on solar before we move on? Okay. Did we get any public comments during the course?
No, I had no public comments. So.
All right. So the next item is our meeting dates. And other than one of them falling on Groundhog Day, which is slightly entertaining, I didn't see any concern there with civic or calendars. Did everyone on the commission have opportunity to review those dates?
They're in the packet, yeah. So if there's any, yeah, if anybody has any awareness of conflicts with the remaining ones for this year, let me know, and you can always let me know afterwards too, just so that we're keeping track for attendance.
Yeah, I think it's February 2nd is the one that I looked up, and it was Groundhog Day.
Okay. Well, hopefully it's not true. Yeah, true Groundhog Day. Yeah, and we will be doing our meeting dates for then the rest of 2023 here shortly. We're waiting for council to approve their calendar. So.
Do we have any other scheduled? I know typically it's once a year, but I thought council had requested more frequent joint meetings. Do we have any others that you know of?
No, the only one we had was the one we just had. And even next year, going into next year, there's only one. We have had some internal conversations about ensuring that there are training dates already scheduled at the beginning of the year. So we're not scrambling, trying to find a date that works for everybody. And a couple different opportunities throughout the year to do that, including a tour of projects. We've been talking about that for a while, and that's the same problem, is then we don't put it on the calendar and we're not thinking about it. So next year we're going to schedule it ahead of time. Got it. We're going to plan
something
ahead.
about October. What's going to be our tours?
Yeah, I know. It's our agendas are looking pretty gnarly, and it's dark already. So, I mean, we'd have to start pretty early. So we got to think ahead. So unfortunately, so.
All right, looking to the commission, are there any dates that you would like to change, seeing the dates proposed for our 2022-2023 meeting dates? Seeing none. All right. Training information. Jenny, I know you sent out some information about Northern Kentucky.
Yes. Okay, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, they do every other year do a conference. This year it's in Louisville. It's at the end of September. So September 28th through 30th. So if you're interested, we need to get moving on that because that's going to require travel and all that, which is fine. We can definitely work through that. I don't know if people are interested. We're still discussing amongst staff whether someone's going or not, just given our workload and time frame. So if that's of interest to you, please let me know and we'll get you with Judy and get that coordinated. We do need to make sure people are going to go, that you're actually going to attend, because we did have a couple challenges with APA where some arrangements were made and then canceled, and then there was no refunds. So we want to make sure we're being mindful of the city's funds for that.
Now, they did have a remote opportunity, I thought,
yes,
in some of them.
There is. Yes, absolutely. There's virtual, there's a single day. So, I mean, there's lots of options. We can definitely look into that. The other thing I included was about aligning housing and economic development. And I know Kathy has signed up for that. So that is October the 3rd, a Monday, and it's a full day event. It's at the Exchange, so it's here in town, but it's about housing and economic development. It's put on by several different organizations. So if you're interested in that, I would need to know by tomorrow in order to secure that. So
out of curiosity, which organizations are sponsoring that?
It is through MORPC, Ohio Economic Development, APA is involved. So it's all the different groups. Yeah. Yeah. Ohio.
MORPC is involved. Okay. I feel comfortable.
Ohio Capital Corporation for Housing, that's on there. They're a sponsor too. So.
All right.
Can I back up one item?
Yeah.
To the calendar dates?
Yep.
I just want to clarify, the question was, you said, do we have any problem with those dates?
Do we want to move? So City Council has told us that we can revisit twice a year and see if we need to shift any dates. Right. Because they challenged us to maintain attendance at the
on a
meetings.
bigger, I'm saying, I could tell you that I'm not going to be here on October 6th, but we're not going to move a meeting because I'm not going to be here. So it's really structurally, this is the cadence we want to have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so like in this discussion, if 3 people said October 6th, I can't be there, then we would move the meeting.
That would be so much better.
No, because one person doesn't come and then we don't have quorum. All right, administrative approval discussion.
So I think I raised this maybe previously with some of you or maybe everybody about looking at our administrative approval criteria. So that's what staff is allowed to approve. And I can provide more information in the next packet. I just wanted you all to be thinking about this.
Menu boards.
Sorry, go ahead.
Menu boards. That's mine.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's lots of opportunities for us for smaller cases, similar tonight, like instead of someone going through a review process and writing staff reports and coming and being on the consent agenda and getting things approved, like are there opportunities for that, that you would feel comfortable with staff approving that? So we had previously talked about, the menu boards, being something to look at. Other modifications, so, material, there are provisions for material changes, for building expansions to a threshold. So there's definitely a threshold for some of those things. We have, could include individual signs within PUDs, like ground sign replacement, some of those things.
Can staff do a little bit of homework and just in the last 12 months, look through how many of the items we've said work with staff to?
Okay, yeah.
And see, not the refine, not that they got us 95% of the way, but when we said, okay, one of the conditions is worked with staff to come up with photometric plan, or work with staff to those, if you could bring those back forward for consideration. I think those are the easy ones. If we already said we're okay with staff working on these.
And maybe we would do the same for consent items. So what items work for consent that you all did not talk about, and let's see what that sort of yields. I mean, again, because if we're already doing, well, I mean, it might not be that many, but if there are things that are consistently, you all feel comfortable with what staff is doing, which means we're doing our job and you have no concerns, and that's a good thing. So just to be mindful of everybody's time and energy. So, okay, we'll do that. So I just didn't know if there's any other thoughts about if there's anything that sticks out in your mind of things that we should definitely are not a good use of your time to be reviewing that staff is taking care of. So I guess
I think consent agenda and those can.
Okay, we'll start with that then.
Work with staff is a good jumping off point.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
All right, any other communications from the commission? The peace poll looks great. So that was the addition, the peace poll where it said the different languages, that turned out very nicely. Has anyone gone by mobility? Is that in yet? I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, no, it's in the works, but not quite yet.
Okay.
I don't think it's starting to like.
No, I think they're I think they're going through permitting at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was at the peace poll celebration. It was very nice. We were together.
Very nice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I do think it's a record. So have a wonderful Thursday evening, and we'll see you next time.